Hello there, my lovely people. Now, today what we're going to be doing is looking at the poetry section. This is a higher tier poetry, but it's from the May 2017 Unit 1 paper. And we're going to just look at these two poems together. Now, as always, first thing we need to do is think about the question. It tells you to spend an hour on this section, and I know you don't have a full hour in your time, so however long you manage to spend on it to get your answer, that's fine. Think carefully about the poems before you write your answer, and that's what we're going to be doing in the video today, is doing the thinking carefully bit together so that you can go on and write them really confidently. Now, as always, the question actually tells us what both poems are about. So we're told this already, it's there for us. We don't even have to think about it that hard because it's there. Both poets write about groups of school pupils. That's what both poets write about. Nice and easy. Now, the question is always the same, okay? Because the question is always write about both poems and their effect on you, show how they are similar and how they are different. So the question is always saying, write about both, i.e. do comparisons, okay? Similar and how they are different, comparisons, because comparison is worth half your marks. Their effect on you is a bit of a misnomer because, let's be real, if you're sitting in an exam hall, you're not feeling the emotions of the exam necessarily. What you're probably feeling is bored / tired / anxious. So don't think about the actual effect of the poem on you. Think about what the techniques that the author has used do to create an effect. That way you're not going to just go, I don't know, the poem makes me feel sad because I thought maybe this exam would be over by now and it's not. Think instead about how is the poet trying to create an impression in you. You can write about each poem separately and compare them, but we've talked about this already. It's better if you do each paragraph with both poems, because if you write all about Assembly and then write all about the Nighthawks and then compare them, and you run out of time, you're going to automatically lose half your marks at least because you haven't done the comparison. Whereas if you treat each paragraph like a mini essay, so if you say, in Assembly, blah, 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 however, in Nighthawks, blah, 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 and talk about each one in each paragraph, so you end up with both poems in each paragraph, that way, if you run out of time at the end, it's okay, you've still compared the poems, you'll still probably get a good mark. It stops you running out of time, and it actually encourages you to make better and more in-depth comparisons, so it's really worth doing. So if we start by just reading through the poems, we'll start with Assembly. Somebody whispered something, and a little titter skittered and scuttled along the rows, then buried under a heap of teachers' frowns. Nobody spoke. The hall was huge with silence. No words fluttered on the empty air, only dust motes moved in the curious light that chinned itself up to the window and peered through. Somebody coughed. Feet shuffled themselves. The headmaster banged his fist until the startled lectern jumped with fright. You down there, that boy in the green shirt. His signpost finger zapped us all, but nobody moved, nobody spoke. Only the titter, feral as anything, blundered around the room seeking escape. Well, I mean, the school uniform. It's grey trousers, and the shirt is green. Okay, and then you've got the other poem, which is The Nighthawks. This little harbour where bored pupils moor their boats in the faggy mist. School is forgotten now, stubbed out as we dawdle and drag, trawling for laughter. Our words are puffed out or held in the heart, expelled in perfect gossiping rings. Through the window, in the streets, afternoon spills into evening. A rush-hour tide of flowing feet and faces. The moon is a silver spoon. Lights come on in the cafe. Every word has been said now. The chink of cup and spoon is done as we fumble for change and disperse like sugar dissolving into the caffeine city with peppermints handy for questioning parents. But for the moment, we are sails, filled up with ourselves, heading homeward through the dregs of dust. Okay, so you got the two poems. They've told you they're both about groups of school pupils in the question, but there might be something more to it than that. Now, you're going to remember that we talked about fart wars before we left school, And we talked about how you don't need to use fart wars as a structure for your answer, but it's a really good thing to use as a structure for your analysis. So if we start off with fart wars, we're looking at our first and final lines first of all. We've got somebody whispered something and the shirt is green. So this is like the background of it in your first and final lines. Oh, or you could not highlight it, whatever you want. Let's be fair. There we go. I'm just doing whatever it fancies. Now, if you read the first and final lines here, you can see the idea that somebody whispered something takes away the idea of responsibility from any one person, and it's unclear who did it or what it was. And that's highlighted by the idea that they're all wearing the green shirt at the end. So it's this idea that the pupils are more of a mass rather than working as individuals. And your idea maybe gets lost in the group. Whereas this other one is a little bit different. You have the idea of it being a little harbour. The idea of it being a little harbour of dusk. So it's like the evening is a safe place for the pupils. It's a safe space for them, a harbour where they can be safe, like a ship is safe in harbour from the sea. So that's the first idea. Now, if we think about what the poems are about, we're kind of given that. They're both about groups of pupils or school pupils. So that's nice and easy. Let's look for any repeated ideas that we have in there. So first of all, in this one, you've got the little titter here. No, see, my highlight is just broken there. There we go. That's not even close. But can you see how titter skittered and scuttled? Obviously, by the fact that I cannot say those words, you can see that there is alliteration going on. Titter, skittered, scuttled going on, that repetition of the T sound. And if you think about it, sounds a little bit like people whispering in a hall. So it's representing the sound of what's going on. And then can you see how it burrowed as well? So it's describing it like an animal. Now you also have then fluttered like a bird. And you have the idea that the titter was feral as well. So it's like a wild animal, blundering and seeking escape. So it's separate from the pupils. It's like an animal. Now here, that's interesting because that's reflected in the title of the other poem, right? You've got the Nighthawks. So it's the idea that they're like birds maybe at night. But then you have this repeated idea through this poem of something that actually a lot of people missed. And I'm really grateful that they missed it because it shows that they are being good pupils, which is that these pupils are smoking, right? So the faggy mist, as in it's the mist of their fags, their cigarettes. Stubbed out gives this idea of cigarettes or smoking. Them taking a drag on a cigarette, but obviously drag also goes with dawdle because it's the idea of walking slowly. Then their words being puffed out, like they're puffing smoke out of their lungs, or held in the heart. So the idea that they've got that smoke inside them. And expelled in perfect gossiping rings. So they're puffing out the smoke rings. And then later on, they have peppermints handy for questioning parents. So they're suggesting that they're hiding their smoking from their parents by using peppermints to cover the fact that they have cigarette breath. But then they're described as sails as well, and sails are full of air. But these guys, instead of being filled up with air, they're filled up with the smoke, and they're filled up with themselves, the idea that they're the best. So you have this repeated idea running through there. But what's interesting is that idea of animal imagery there is moved to here, and maybe an idea of rebellion between the two poems. So these guys, they're just kind of being silly. They've got a little joke going on. But these guys are smoking in the evenings, are having time away from, it says here, school is forgotten now. So they're having time away from that situation. So if you look at the tone of both of them, you can see that that's kind of pulled up with this idea that neither of them are particularly keen on school. And this idea here, I think especially, that's quite conversational. You've got that first person, I mean, the school uniform, and the breaks here to show that it's quite conversational. This one is perhaps a little bit more spooky in its tone. It's maybe a bit more eerie. So you have the idea of the evening, the idea of something flowing or spilling, the idea of dissolving, the dregs of dusk. It's quite putting together an image of the evening, or an image where you can't necessarily see everything that's going on. So then you want to look at the words, any words that jump out to you. Now that's obviously going to be up to you guys, which words jump out to you, which words say something to you that, you know, you want to talk about. And then you've got the techniques. So we talked a little bit about skitters and scuttled and fluttered. You might want to think about the idea that the light, there's loads of personification going on in this poem. So you've got personification going on with the titter. You've got the idea that the light is chinning itself up to the window and peering through. So the light is personified there as well. The lectern is personified here as startled and jumping with fright because the headmaster's banging on it. You've got just this idea as well of it seeking escape. So the idea that the Joker's trying to get out of the school, is trying to escape. So you've got all that going on there. And then here you have the idea of more their boats in the mist and a harbour. So it's like an extended metaphor. And then if you look, that extended metaphor kind of comes through here. So boats trawl is the idea that they're boats as an extended metaphor. So you've got rush hour, tide, flowing is this imagery of water. And you've got that alliteration, flowing feet and faces. Now, if you think about the f sound, it sounds like running water. Then you have the idea of disperse, dissolving, which again is liquid. The moment we are sails filled up with ourselves, heading homewards. So it's this idea that they are like little boats in a harbour, and then like little boats heading homewards. Again, heading homewards is alliteration. Now, when we're talking about alliteration, if we can, try to think about what kind of alliteration it is. So there you've got that aspirate alliteration. It makes you puff out your breath. And that's kind of what they're doing in the poem, right? It makes you puff out your breath like they puff out their breath when you read it aloud. And it makes you think of the idea of breath filling up a sail. We've got heading homeward. And then you have the falling action through the dregs of dust. It's very d as it falls down, very downward, and its motion. And again, you've got this idea, the moon is a silver spoon, internal rhyme, moon and spoon, and also the idea there of another metaphor. So there's metaphor being used. So we've done first and final lines, we've done what the poem's about, we've done the repeated ideas, we've done the tone, we've done the words, we've done alliteration and all the techniques. We are looking for rhyme and rhythm, and then we'll look at structure. So you can see that both of them have more of a kind of unstructured rhyme and rhythm to them. And if you think about it, that makes sense in terms of the content of the poem. So you're going to want to think about, when you're talking about rhyme and rhythm, please never just tell me the rhyme scheme of the poem. It's pointless. I have the same poem in front of me. If I'm marking it, I can see that. But how does it relate to the topic? So how does an unstructured rhyme scheme or an unstructured rhythm relate to maybe the unstructured way the children are behaving in the poems? Down here, can you see how you've got lots of things that go together very quickly with no ends? So they run on lines and then a few stops. And it's almost like there's a rising action in the poem. There's kind of like a crescendo in the poem as things get faster and faster and faster, and they're having a great evening, and then they go home. So think about that when you're thinking about your rhyme and rhythm. And then if you look at the structure, again, it's quite unstructured. There's not a specific sort of number of lines per stanza. And again, you could use that to talk about how the children are behaving, how that relates to how they're presenting themselves. Now, this isn't everything that's in the poem, but it's just to try to get you going so that you've got some ideas that you can use to start writing. I hope you have a lovely day, and I will speak to you next lesson.